He thought forcing her to sing would break her spirit, a cruel encore to end what they once called love. Beneath the golden chandeliers, she stood trembling, her hands folded over the curve of her belly, her voice soft as breath. Every note she sang was a memory, not an accusation, a confession whispered into the air. The crowd heard beauty, only he heard the truth. And in that silence between verses, his guilt began to sing louder than her song. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there? I'd love to know how far our story is reaching. Tell us in the comments. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, every crystal on the chandelier scattering it like splinters of pride. Music swelled softly from hidden speakers, that kind of expensive calm that rich people think sounds like class. Laughter moved like champagne through the room, cold, sparkling, and hollow. At the center of it all stood Ethan Hale, groom of the hour, immaculate in his tailored white tuxedo. He looked like success, sculpted into human form. Confident smile, broad shoulders, that effortless charm that made people forget where the money came from. He had everything a man could flaunt. A mansion overlooking the sea. A company he claimed he built from nothing. And now a new bride whose family name came with power, not just beauty, but behind the applause there was something else. A plan. A cruel, quiet performance that would seal his victory over the woman he had discarded. Near the back of the ballroom, in the shadow of the grand piano, Clara Morgan waited. Her gown wasn't silk or designer lace. It was simple, navy blue chiffon that curved gently around her pregnant belly. She kept her hands low, resting on the child growing inside her, as if drawing strength from a heartbeat she couldn't see. She hadn't wanted to come. She had begged the wedding planner to send someone else. But the money, the $2,000 advance, had already paid her rent. The rest would buy a crib, baby clothes, formula. Saying no meant eviction. Saying yes meant standing in front of the man who'd abandoned her when she told him she was carrying his child. And now she was here, hired as the entertainment for his wedding. The irony made her stomach twist. Clara! A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the coordinator, a young woman with an earpiece, clipboard pressed to her chest. "You're on in 5 minutes. They'll cue the lights when the guests are seated." The groom specifically requested something emotional, just not too sad, not too sad. Clara almost laughed, but the sound never reached her lips. Instead, she nodded, polite, professional. The perfect performer. When the coordinator left, Clara closed her eyes and exhaled. Her fingers brushed the edge of the piano, cool, smooth, indifferent. She looked up, and across the room Ethan caught her gaze. For a brief second, the crowd around him blurred away. His eyes, the same ones that once promised forever, now held the faintest glint of satisfaction. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked entertained, as if her presence here, dressed modestly, visibly pregnant, was part of the show. So this is what you wanted, she thought. You want them to see me small, to see me struggle to hold my dignity in your world of chandeliers and diamonds. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from restraint. Rage lived just under her skin, but she swallowed it down. The song she was about to sing, a piece she had written months ago, wasn't made to hurt him. It was made to survive him, and maybe that was worse. The lights dimmed. The chatter softened. The sound of the string quartet faded into silence. A hush settled, heavy and expectant. The announcer's voice echoed gently through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, to bless this union, please welcome our guest vocalist, Miss Clara Morgan." The spotlight bloomed. Soft, golden, merciless. Clara stepped forward. Her shoes clicked once against the marble floor. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, scanning, judging. The weight of them pressed down like invisible hands. Ethan turned toward her. His arm looped elegantly through his bride's. Isabella, beautiful and porcelain-like, smiled faintly, unaware of the theater being played out before her. Clara took her place beside the piano. She nodded to the accompanist, an older man with kind eyes who gave her a silent nod in return. Then she looked at the microphone, and for one heartbeat, she almost couldn't breathe. That microphone had always been her confession booth, the place where she told her truth, not in words, but in melodies that carried everything her heart couldn't explain. Tonight, it was different. Tonight, her truth would be dressed as grace. She took a deep breath. Her voice began softly, almost fragile, like candlelight trembling in wind. I once knew a love that felt like sunrise, bright enough to blind, too pure to last. I once knew a promise whispered in shadows, and learned how silence can echo the past. The first note rippled through the room, delicate as silk. Conversations died mid-whisper. Forks froze halfway to plates. The only sound was her voice, rising and falling like a tide. Ethan's smirk faltered. He had expected bitterness, a desperate woman pleading for sympathy. What he heard instead was peace. Pain transformed into beauty. Every note pulled him backward, to the nights when she had sung for him in their tiny apartment, barefoot, her laughter mixing with the sound of rain. To the day she had shown him the sonogram photo, eyes shining, and he had turned away, saying he wasn't ready for that kind of love. And now here she was, singing in his ballroom, her face serene, her eyes soft but distant. The lyrics drifted like confession. You left before the dawn could find us, before the truth could take its breath. But love, it lingers, not in anger, it forgives what pride forgets. The words were not vengeance. They were release. Ethan felt his throat tighten, a strange pressure behind his ribs. He tried to smile, to pretend none of this mattered, but his reflection in the champagne glass looked unfamiliar, smaller somehow. Beside him, Isabella dabbed her eyes. "She's wonderful," she whispered. "You can feel her soul in every word." He nodded stiffly, his pulse thrumming. Clara's gaze never lingered on him, yet every syllable found its mark. There was no accusation, no name, no blame, just truth, laid bare in melody, and in that truth was something unbearable, mercy. He had come prepared to feel powerful. Instead, he felt naked. The final verse rose, clear and unbroken. Some stories end with thunder, some with the quiet fall of rain. I've learned that love is not possession, it's letting go without the pain. The piano faded to silence. Clara held the last note just long enough to let the room breathe with her. When she finally lowered the microphone, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, sacred somehow. No applause followed at first. The audience seemed afraid to disturb the stillness she had created. Then someone began to clap, slow and hesitant until the sound grew. A ripple of admiration that swelled into thunder. Clara smiled faintly, bowed her head, and stepped back from the stage. Ethan didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands hung limp at his sides, cold with something he hadn't felt in years, remorse. The applause around him sounded like rain on glass, distant and relentless. Isabella turned to him, her eyes searching. "You okay?" He forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine, just moved, I guess." But inside his thoughts screamed. Her song hadn't named him, yet every word was a mirror reflecting his betrayal. She hadn't condemned him, but her kindness did what anger never could. It broke him. Across the ballroom, Clara reached the side door and paused. For a second she turned, her eyes meeting his one last time. There was no hatred there, no triumph, only forgiveness, and that mercy was what tore him apart. The door closed softly behind her, and with it, the music that had haunted him began to echo in his head like a ghost that refused to leave. He had wanted to humiliate her. Instead, she had redeemed him and left him to face himself. Somewhere in the quiet, he realized something painful and simple. Her silence after the song was the loudest truth of all, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Hale wished he could be the man she believed he could have been. Before the chandeliers, before the shame, there had been love, the kind that grows quietly, like light creeping through curtains at dawn. Clara Morgan was 27 when she met Ethan Hale. Back then, he wasn't a millionaire in designer suits. He was just a man with sharp dreams and rough edges, working long hours at a small software startup downtown. He used to drink burnt coffee, type until his fingers ached, and tell anyone who'd listen that he'd changed the world. Clara believed him. She had met him in the simplest way, through music. He'd been sitting at a corner table in a cafe one Friday night, while she sang with her guitar for a few dollars and tips of loose change. She remembered how he looked that first evening, weary, shoulders heavy, his tie loosened, eyes distant. But when she began to sing, he had looked up just once and never looked away again. Afterward, he'd walked up to her as she packed her guitar. "Your voice," he said quietly. "It doesn't sound like performance. It sounds like truth." Clara smiled. "That's all I ever tried to sing." They talked until the cafe closed, and he walked her home under flickering streetlights. She thought he'd be like all the others, kind for a night gone by morning. But he came back. The next night, the next week, and the week after that. Soon, he was sitting front row every Friday, always listening like every lyric mattered. He would leave a $10 bill in her open case and a small folded note, "Don't ever stop singing." Love came not as fireworks, but as routine. Coffee at sunrise, laughter over cheap takeout, his jacket draped over her shoulders on cold nights. She sang while he coded. He called her his muse, the melody that kept his ambition awake. When he finally proposed, with a small silver ring bought from a pawn shop, he told her, "You're the reason I want to become someone. But success changes people, slowly, quietly, then all at once." The startup he worked for was acquired by a larger company. Ethan was promoted, then praised, then photographed. His suits got sharper, his words colder. He stopped eating with her at the kitchen counter and started taking business calls during dinner. At first, Clara thought it was stress. "It's just the workload," he'd say. "Once I settle in, things will go back to normal." But normal kept fading farther away. He began to flinch when she talked about music. "You could make more money if you stopped chasing that singing dream." He'd roll his eyes at her thrift store dresses, buy her something expensive, then criticize how she looked in it. He began to correct the way she spoke in public, laughed too loudly when she said something naive. The man who once wrote her songs now treated her like an old lyric he'd outgrown. Still, she stayed. Love makes fools of the kind-hearted. Then came the night that broke everything. It was raining. She remembered the thunder, the way lightning flashed against their apartment window. She had been waiting with candles lit, dinner on the table, something simple, pasta, salad, a bottle of cheap wine. She'd even put on the red dress he once said made her look like home. He walked in late, smelling of whiskey and perfume that wasn't hers. "Ethan," she said softly. "Where were you?" He shrugged, unbothered. "Meeting investors." "At 11 p.m.? He laughed. "You wouldn't understand how these things work." Something in his tone cracked her patience. "Then explain it," she said. "Because I feel like I'm losing you." He looked at her for a long moment, not with love, but irritation. "You're not losing me, Clara. You're just not part of my world anymore." Her breath caught. "What's that supposed to mean?" He poured himself a drink, didn't look at her. "I'm moving forward. My career's taking off. I can't keep dragging along someone who sings in cafes for tips." Her voice trembled. "I thought we were building this together." "You thought wrong." That night she didn't cry while he slept in the other room. She sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. One hand pressed against her stomach, because earlier that day she had found out she was pregnant. She had planned to tell him over dinner, but now, looking at the stranger across the hall, she knew he wouldn't see the news as a blessing. When she finally whispered, "I'm pregnant," the next morning he didn't even look surprised. He looked annoyed. "Clara," he said carefully, like explaining something to a child, "this isn't the right time. You can't keep it." Her knees went weak. "Can't keep it?" He sighed, set down his coffee and faced her with that calm corporate cruelty that doesn't sound like cruelty until the meaning sinks in. "I'll handle everything. I'll transfer some money. You deserve to live comfortably, but this will ruin everything I've worked for." Her heart broke on the spot. "It's our child, Ethan." His reply was simple, final. "No, Clara, it's your choice. But if you keep it, you do it without me." And just like that, he walked out of the apartment and out of her life. The next morning, his closet was empty, his suits gone, his toothbrush missing. Only the small silver engagement ring remained on the counter, next to the crumpled napkin that still said, "Don't ever stop singing." In the weeks that followed, silence became Clara's only company. The apartment that once echoed with laughter now sounded like an empty shell. The hum of the refrigerator, the drip of a leaky faucet, the faint lullaby of city noise outside her window. She tried to fill the silence with music, But every time her fingers touched the piano keys, the notes felt heavy, broken. Her voice cracked midway through songs she used to love. It was as if the melodies themselves had lost faith in her. She took on small singing jobs again, dimly lit restaurants, weekend weddings, anything that could buy another week of groceries. She learned to stretch a can of soup into 2 meals. She learned that strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it just breathes quietly through another day. The pregnancy grew heavier, both in her body and her mind. Some nights she lay awake, hands over her belly, whispering to the child inside her, "It's okay, little one. We'll be fine. Mama's still here." Every time the baby kicked, it was like a heartbeat reminding her to keep moving. Then came the eviction notice. The landlord had slipped it under the door, a thin white envelope that carried more weight than she could bear. 2 weeks to pay rent or leave. She sat on the couch with the notice trembling in her hand and stared at the blank wall where Ethan's framed photograph used to hang. He was probably somewhere high above this city, drinking champagne, closing deals, laughing at the thought that she might still be waiting for him. But she wasn't waiting. That night, she opened her old laptop and searched for gigs, scrolling through endless listings, bars, private events, charity galas, anything. Her eyes burned with exhaustion until one message caught her attention. Event singer needed for luxury wedding, immediate hire. She clicked. The pay was more than she'd ever been offered, $3,000 for one night. Enough to pay off the bills, buy a crib, maybe even move to a better apartment. Her heart lifted for the first time in months. She replied immediately, trying to sound calm. Professional vocalist available. Can perform classical or contemporary styles. Flexible schedule. 2 hours later, she got a reply. You've been selected. Rehearsal next week at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Details will follow. P. Monroe, event planner. For a brief moment, hope felt real again. The following morning, she met her best friend Lena, who worked at a nearby bookstore. Lena had been her anchor through every storm. Fiery, loyal, the kind of friend who knew when to comfort and when to fight on your behalf. When Clara told her about the wedding job, Lena's eyes widened. $3,000? That's incredible. Maybe things are turning around. I hope so, Clara said softly, stirring her tea. I just need this to go right. For a few days, she allowed herself to dream again. She cleaned her apartment, washed tiny baby clothes her neighbor had donated, even sang while cooking. For the first time in a long time, she caught herself humming. But peace has a way of shattering when you least expect it. A week later, the official email arrived with full event details. Clara opened it eagerly and froze. The words on the screen blurred as she read them again and again. Wedding of Mr. Ethan Hale and Miss Isabella Vance. Her breath caught. Her heart stumbled. The world tilted. It couldn't be him, but it was. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the details, the date, the venue, the song list. And then, one line like a dagger, the groom personally approved your demo performance. Her vision blurred. She pressed a hand against her chest, struggling to breathe. So this was no accident. He had hired her. The man who had abandoned her when she was carrying his child now wanted her to stand before hundreds of guests and sing for his happiness, humiliation disguised as opportunity. Tears came, hot and relentless. She wanted to delete the email, to refuse, to vanish. But then she saw the eviction notice again on the table. The unpaid bills. The tiny stack of baby clothes folded neatly in the corner. Her voice cracked as she whispered to her unborn child, I can't walk into that room. Not his room. But survival doesn't ask permission from pride. That night, Lena came over and found her staring at the laptop screen, her face pale and silent. When Clara explained everything, Lena listened, then said something she didn't expect. Go. Clara blinked. You can't be serious. I am, Lena said firmly. He thinks he's writing your ending. Prove him wrong. Walk into that room and make him see that he didn't break you. Take his stage and make it yours. Clara looked away, trembling. Lena, they'll all be watching me like I'm a joke. Then give them a show they'll never forget, Lena whispered. Not one of anger, one of grace. That's what will haunt him most. Clara sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked. The city breathed beyond her window. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she spent the following days preparing, practicing, choosing a simple blue gown that fit her growing belly. She practiced breathing through nerves, singing while tears ran down her face. Then again, until her voice no longer trembled, she told herself she was doing it for the baby. She told herself she was doing it for survival. But deep down, she knew it was something else. She wanted to face him one last time, not with bitterness, but with the calm he could never buy. And as the wedding day drew closer, something inside her shifted. Her fear began to turn into clarity. She wasn't going there to seek revenge. She was going there to reclaim the one thing he could never take, her voice. And in that voice, he would finally hear everything she had never said aloud. The week before the wedding crept up like fog, slow, quiet, and suffocating. Every morning Clara woke to the same dread. The date circled in red on her calendar. November 12th, Hale Vance wedding. Grand Meridian Hotel. She tried to convince herself she was ready, that she could face him and keep her composure. But every time she imagined standing in front of Ethan, her throat tightened until she couldn't breathe. Still, she practiced. Every night, after her part-time restaurant shift, she'd sit at her worn-out piano, the one with chipped keys and a faint smell of varnish, and sing until her voice trembled. She sang lullabies for her unborn child, hymns for her courage, and the soft beginnings of the songs she'd written in secret, the one she promised herself she would never perform. The song was her truth, raw, unfiltered, and full of things words couldn't say. Every lyric was a wound that had learned how to sing. She wasn't sure whether she'd ever dare to let the world hear it. 2 days before the rehearsal, the wedding planner Patricia Monroe called. Her voice was brisk and polished, the kind that always sounded like it was smiling even when it wasn't. "Miss Morgan, we'll have rehearsal at the Grand Meridian this Thursday at 3. The groom and bride will be there, so please bring your full set list." And Patricia paused for effect. Mr. Hale asked specifically for emotional pieces. He said you sing with real feeling. He was very insistent. Clara's stomach twisted. He was very insistent. "I'll be there," she said quietly. When she hung up, she stared at the phone for a long time. He wanted to see her before the wedding, to watch her tremble, maybe to remind her of her place. She touched her belly, whispering softly, "We won't give him what he wants." The baby kicked gently, as if in agreement. Thursday arrived like a storm she couldn't avoid. Clara spent the morning moving through her apartment in silence. She ironed the navy rehearsal dress until every crease was gone, tied her hair neatly in a bun, and placed her song sheets into a black leather folder. Before leaving, she paused by the small framed sonogram on her dresser, a tiny, grainy image, a heartbeat frozen in time. She smiled weakly. "Wish me luck, little one." The Grand Meridian Hotel loomed over the city like a palace of glass and gold. Stepping into the marble-floored lobby felt like entering another world, Ethan's world. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and staff members moved like clockwork, each smile rehearsed, each word measured. At the reception desk, a woman guided her to the ballroom. "Rehearsal for the Hale Vance wedding?" "This way, ma'am." The ballroom doors opened, and for a moment Clara forgot to breathe. It was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above rows of ivory chairs. A massive archway of white roses framed the altar, and gold ribbons draped across every seat. The smell of fresh lilies and polished wood filled the air, and at the center of it all, Ethan Hale. He stood near the stage, his back to her, speaking to Patricia. The sound of his voice hit her like déjà vu, smooth, commanding, utterly in control. Her heartbeat stumbled. She wanted to turn and walk out, but her feet refused to move. Patricia spotted her first. "Ah, Miss Morgan, you're here right on time." Ethan turned. For a second, neither of them spoke. He looked different now, sharper, older, but his arrogance remained untouched. His tailored suit hugged him like armor, his tie immaculate, his cufflinks gleaming with the subtle arrogance of wealth. But his eyes, the same grey eyes that once looked at her with warmth, now flickered with something else. Triumph. "Mr. Hale," she said finally, her voice calm, professional. He gave a faint, polite smile. "Miss Morgan, thank you for coming. I'm glad Patricia was able to reach you. Of course, she said. I understand this is an important event. Yes. His gaze flickered briefly to her stomach before returning to her face. It's the most important day of my life. The words were sharp, deliberate. Clara met his gaze evenly. Then I'll do my best to make it perfect. Something flickered in his expression, irritation maybe, or surprise that she hadn't flinched. He gave a curt nod and turned away. Patricia clapped her hands lightly. All right, let's get started. Clara, you'll perform Can't Help Falling in Love for the aisle walk, followed by 2 background pieces during the signing of the register. We'll do a quick sound check first. Clara stepped onto the small stage. The pianist, an older man with silver hair, gave her a kind smile as she handed him the sheet music. Take your time, dear, he whispered. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the microphone. When the pianist struck the first note, the sound echoed beautifully through the ballroom. Smooth, pure, haunting. Then she began to sing. Her voice floated, calm but strong, filling the vast room with warmth that even the cold chandeliers couldn't dim. For those few minutes, it was just her and the music, no eyes watching, no ghosts in her chest. When she finished, silence followed. Even Patricia seemed stunned. That was extraordinary. Ethan didn't speak. His face was unreadable, his arms folded. He looked not at her, but through her. Then he said quietly, her voice has always been emotional. That's what makes it memorable. The emphasis on always was subtle, but deliberate. It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder of history, of intimacy turned to weaponry. Clara's stomach knotted, but she smiled professionally. Thank you, Mr. Hale. Patricia moved on to logistics, giving notes about timing and sound levels. Clara listened, nodded, and took notes. But her mind was far away, on Ethan's expression, his tone, the faint satisfaction in his voice. When rehearsal ended, she gathered her things quickly, hoping to escape before he could speak to her again. But as she turned toward the exit, she heard footsteps. Clara, her name, the way he used to say it. She froze. He approached slowly, his voice smooth, calculated. I didn't expect you'd take the job. I thought you'd have too much pride. She turned to face him, her chin high. I have responsibilities now. Pride doesn't feed a child. For the first time, she saw him falter, just slightly. His gaze softened for half a second before hardening again. Still playing the victim, I see. Her breath hitched, anger rising like heat under her skin. But she didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Good evening, Mr. Hale. She turned to leave, but he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Just make sure you don't bring your personal emotions into the performance. This is my wedding, not your stage for revenge. Her eyes locked on his. Don't worry. I wouldn't waste a song on revenge. Then, softer, almost to herself, she added, that would mean you still mattered. He blinked. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, taut and electric. Then she walked past him, her heels clicking against marble, leaving the faint echo of dignity in her wake. Ethan stood there motionless, the faintest tremor in his jaw. For the first time since their breakup, he couldn't decide if he'd won or lost that moment. When Clara stepped out into the cool evening air, the world felt lighter and colder. She leaned against the marble pillar outside the hotel, exhaling shakily. It was over. The hardest part was done. She had seen him, spoken to him, survived him, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning, because something about the way he had looked at her, that glint of satisfaction, the warning in his voice, told her he wasn't finished. He had a plan for the wedding day, and whatever it wasn't kindness. Still, as she pressed a hand over her belly, she whispered, let him plan. We'll be ready. The night before the wedding arrived, like a storm disguised as silence. Clara sat alone in her small apartment, the air thick with the scent of chamomile tea and rain tapping against the window. The city outside glimmered with the distant noise of life, car horns, laughter, thunder rolling somewhere beyond the skyline. She had her music sheets spread across the table, but her mind was elsewhere, drifting through the ghosts of her past and the shadows of the morning to come. Every time she thought of stepping into that ballroom again, her chest tightened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the weight of everything left unsaid, On the coffee table lay the black folder holding the song she was supposed to sing, but tucked inside, hidden beneath the polished pages of Can't Help Falling in Love, was another one, handwritten in faded ink. Greased from being folded too many times, it was her song, the one she'd written when she first realized Ethan was gone for good. The one that poured out of her like a confession she couldn't keep inside. She'd promised herself she would never sing it publicly. It wasn't meant for the world, it was for her sanity. A letter she could never send. Now, as she stared at the words, she felt the ache of them all over again. You took the light and called it yours, left me with dawns that never came. But love, it doesn't beg or break. It just learns how to live with pain. She ran her fingers over the lines, tracing the ink like scars. Lena's voice echoed in her head from days earlier. He thinks he can humiliate you. Prove him wrong, but was this the way to do it? With a song he didn't approve? A song that spoke too much truth? Her phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. It was a text from Lena. You awake? Clara typed back, yes. Seconds later, Lena called. Can't sleep? Lena's voice was gentle, knowing. Not really. You're thinking about tomorrow, Clara sighed. About everything. About how I'll walk into that room and see him smiling like he never destroyed anything. Then don't let that smile touch you, Lena said. Remember who you are. You're not the same girl he left. Clara stared out the window, the streetlight reflecting in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if forgiveness is strength or weakness. It's both, Lena replied softly. But if it comes from peace, not fear, then it's power. And you've earned that power, Clara. You've bled for it. Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Lena added, do you want me there tomorrow? I can stand at the back just to make sure he doesn't try anything. Clara smiled faintly. You'd terrify him. That's the idea, Lena said, laughing quietly. Then gentler, promise me one thing. Sing for yourself, not for him. I will, Clara whispered. After they hung up, Clara sat in the dim light, holding the sheet of her song. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping faster against the glass. She rose slowly, went to the small mirror by her dresser, and studied her reflection. Her face was thinner now, her eyes older, wiser. There was still a softness there, but beneath it, something unbreakable had taken root. You've survived worse, she whispered to her reflection. You'll survive this too. She placed her hand over her belly. The baby kicked gently as if responding. I'll sing for us, she murmured. Not for him. Then she set the handwritten song aside and began to hum softly, warming her voice. The melody wove through the room like prayer. By the time she finished, the rain had slowed, and the storm outside began to fade into quiet. She slept that night with her music folder beside her, one hand on her belly, her heart steady for the first time in months. Morning came, dressed in silver clouds. Clara woke early, her body tense with both exhaustion and resolve. She showered, braided her hair, and slipped into the simple blue gown she had ironed days ago. Her reflection in the mirror looked calm, though her eyes betrayed the storm underneath. At 9 o'clock, a car from the event company arrived to pick her up. The driver, a young man in a black suit, helped her load her folder and instrument bag into the back seat. The city blurred past the windows, tall glass towers, morning traffic, a sky that threatened rain again. Clara's hand rested protectively over her stomach as she stared out, lost in thought. Halfway there, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A familiar voice responded, smooth and cold. Clara, it's Ethan. Her pulse skipped. How did you get my number? I still had it saved. A pause. I just wanted to make sure you're on your way. Isabella's family is very particular about timing. I'm aware, she said flatly. He chuckled, low, calculated. Don't sound so tense. It's just another performance, right? Her jaw tightened. If you think this is funny, relax, Clara, he interrupted. I'm just making sure everything runs smoothly. I don't want surprises. Neither do I, she replied quietly. There was silence on the line for a moment. And then he said, Good, I'll see you soon. The call ended. Clara lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling slightly. There was something in his tone, a hint of control, a warning she couldn't quite name. She looked out the window again as raindrops began to fall. The sky had darkened, heavy and expectant. Let him play his games, she whispered to herself. I'll sing my truth. By the time she arrived at the Grand Meridian, the hotel was already alive with movement. Valets in uniform hurried to open car doors. Photographers gathered near the entrance, and guests in tailored suits and gowns fluttered through the revolving doors like sequins in motion. Inside, the air was cool and perfumed with roses. Clara's heels clicked softly against marble as she made her way to the service corridor where performers were directed to wait. Her name tag read, Clara Morgan, vocalist. She pinned it on mechanically, her stomach tight with a mix of nerves and defiance. A sound technician handed her a wireless microphone and explained the cue system. We'll start the processional at 4:15, he said. You're first up. The pianist will lead you in. Understood, she said, her voice steady. When he left, she sank onto a chair in the corner, clutching the folder in her lap. The muffled hum of laughter and music floated in from the ballroom beyond the door. Every sound felt distant, unreal. She opened the folder one last time. Her song, the one she'd written for herself, peeked out from beneath the others. She touched the paper lightly, her eyes burning. She still hadn't decided which one she'd sing, the safe choice or the true one. But deep down, she already knew, because some truths can't stay buried forever, not even under chandeliers. And tomorrow, when her voice echoed through that hall, it wouldn't just be sound, it would be reckoning. The wedding day unfolded like a stage play, scripted by fate itself. Soft music drifted through the ballroom, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and the low murmur of elite conversation. Everything gleamed, polished silver, glass chandeliers, sequined dresses. It was a world built to impress, not to feel. Clara stood near the back of the hall, hidden behind a row of floral arrangements taller than she was. Her blue gown shimmered faintly under the amber light, her microphone cold in her hand. She watched through the curtain as Ethan mingled easily among the guests, his laughter practiced, his charm effortless. His bride, Isabella, floated beside him in white silk, radiant. Oblivious, he looked every inch the successful man, confident, adored, untouchable. But as Clara observed him, she saw what others didn't, the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed against the glass he held. He was pretending control. Beneath the polished surface, guilt was already whispering. The wedding planner's voice snapped her out of thought. Miss Morgan, you're on in 5 minutes. Please be ready, Clara nodded, forcing her breath to steady. Her heart thundered against her ribs, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm. I'm ready. She wasn't sure if it was true. The ceremony began with grandeur, violins, organ chords, flower petals falling in choreographed perfection. Isabella walked down the aisle like a scene from a dream, guests rising in admiration. Ethan's expression softened as he watched her, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When the vows were done and the applause faded, the officiant turned toward the guests. Before the newlyweds share their first dance, he announced, we have a special performance, personally requested by the groom. A few heads turned, curious. Clara stepped from behind the curtain. The room seemed to inhale. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. Some guests whispered to each other. Some turned toward Ethan, who stood tall, expression unreadable. Clara caught his gaze, and for a moment, time stopped. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. The trap was set. He had orchestrated this moment, a performance disguised as punishment. A show for his new world to watch him rise above his past. But what he didn't know was that she had come prepared for more than humiliation. Clara walked toward the stage slowly, gracefully, her head high despite the tremor in her hands. The pianist met her eyes, wordlessly asking if she was all right. She gave a small nod. The microphone hissed softly as she lifted it. The room fell, utterly silent. She took a long breath, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Then she began to sing. I once knew a love that felt like sunlight, soft enough to heal, too bright to stay. I once held hands that promised always, until forever learned to fade away. Her voice flowed like liquid glass, fragile, luminous, impossible to look away from. At first, Ethan's expression was smug, as if he were watching a scene he had already written. But slowly, that confidence began to crack. The melody wasn't the one Patricia had approved. It wasn't on any of the printed lists. This was her song, her truth, her confession. You left before the dawn could find us, before truth could take its breath. But love, it lingers, not in anger, it forgives what pride forgets. Each lyric unfolded like a quiet blade, not cutting to wound but to reveal. Guests exchanged glances, sensing the undercurrent in her words. The atmosphere shifted, the shimmer of spectacle giving way to something raw, human, holy. Ethan's jaw tightened. His hand twitched slightly, the smile fading from his lips. Isabella glanced at him, confused, her fingers brushing his arm. "Is everything okay?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the far wall, not on him, but through him. Her voice rose higher, stronger, shimmering with both ache and grace. "Some stories end with thunder, some with a quiet fall of rain. I've learned that love is not possession. It's letting go without the pain." When she reached that final line, her voice broke, not from weakness, but from truth too large for any one heart to hold. The silence that followed was electric. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, like sunlight through clouds, applause began. Hesitant, scattered, then overwhelming. People rose to their feet. The sound filled the hall, echoing off marble walls, but Ethan didn't clap. He couldn't. He stood frozen, his face pale, eyes locked on the woman he had once destroyed, the woman who had just turned his cruelty into beauty, because the song hadn't exposed him by name. It had done something far worse. It had revealed his soul. As the applause faded, Clara lowered the microphone and bowed slightly. Her gaze drifted to Ethan once more, not with anger, not with triumph, but with peace. Then she turned and walked off the stage. The wedding planner rushed toward her backstage. "That was breathtaking." "I've never heard anything like it," Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you. You changed the song?" Patricia asked, confused but impressed. "Yes," Clara said simply. "It felt right." Before anyone could question further, she gathered her things and slipped quietly toward the exit corridor. But halfway there, a voice stopped her. "Clara," it was him. She turned slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face ashen, eyes haunted. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low, brittle. She met his gaze steadily. "Why not? You told me not to bring emotion." "I didn't. I brought truth." He took a step closer. "You embarrassed me." "In front of everyone." She shook her head softly. "No, Ethan, I freed myself. That's all." He exhaled sharply, trying to find anger, but all that came out was exhaustion. "What do you want from me?" Her eyes softened. "Nothing," he blinked. "Nothing?" "I wanted peace, and I found it. You can keep the rest." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside the corridor, applause echoed again, this time for the newlyweds. The sound felt distant, almost ironic. Ethan looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "You always sang like you believed people could change. And you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "I used to." Her expression gentled, but she didn't answer. Some truths didn't need closure. When she finally turned to leave, she said only one thing. "I hope someday you learn the difference between winning and being forgiven." Then she walked away, her footsteps soft against marble, fading into silence. Ethan stood there alone, the faint echo of her song still hanging in the air, a melody that would haunt him long after the applause had died. Outside, the afternoon sky was breaking open with light rain. Clara lifted her face to it and smiled. The drops felt cool, cleansing, almost like a baptism. She pressed her hand over her belly. The baby kicked once, strong and certain. She whispered, "We did it." And for the first time since he'd left her, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole, because forgiveness, she finally understood, wasn't weakness. It was the last note of a song only the strong could finish. The applause from the ballroom echoed in Ethan's mind long after it had faded. It followed him through the corridors, into the marble bathroom where he leaned over the sink, gripping the porcelain edge so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The face in the mirror didn't look like him anymore. The perfectly styled hair, the flawless tuxedo, all of it suddenly felt like costume, like armor borrowed from a better man. Clara's song still rang in his ears. each lyric pressing against his chest like invisible hands. Love doesn't beg or break. It just learns how to live with pain. He squeezed his eyes shut. That line refused to leave. For years, he had told himself he'd done what he had to do, that ending things with her had been logical, strategic, the cost of ambition. He had convinced himself that money and status could rewrite the story, that success could silence guilt, but now, under the harsh white light of his own reflection, the truth stared back. He had built his empire on cowardice. He splashed cold water on his face, but it did nothing to cool the burning beneath his skin. The bathroom door creaked open. Ethan, Isabella's voice. He straightened instantly, masking his turmoil with a smooth smile. "Hey, you look beautiful. Everything's perfect." She hesitated in the doorway, her white gown glowing under the chandelier. "Everyone's talking about that singer. Clara, right?" He froze. "Yes." She was incredible. Isabella stepped closer, her expression curious. "You know her?" The question sliced through the air like glass. For a moment, Ethan's throat closed. Then he forced out, "She used to sing at events for one of my company's partners." That's all. It wasn't even a convincing lie, but Isabella smiled faintly and nodded. "She's got something real, the way she sang, and it felt like she'd lived every word." Ethan laughed tightly. "Maybe that's why I hired her." "Then you made the right choice," Isabella said softly. "You should tell her she was wonderful." She kissed his cheek, light as silk, and left. The door closed behind her, and the silence returned, heavier than before. He looked at himself in the mirror again and hated what he saw. Meanwhile, outside the ballroom, Clara stood beneath the covered archway that led to the parking lot. The rain had turned steady, streaking the pavement with silver. She had removed her heels, standing barefoot on the cool stone tiles. Her body was exhausted, her soul calm. The world beyond the hotel felt quiet, almost sacred. She should have felt anger, satisfaction, revenge, but what filled her instead was a kind of stillness, a release so profound it made her want to cry. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lena. "Saw the live feed. You were magnificent. People are talking about you, in a good way," Clara smiled. She hadn't known the event was being streamed online. She imagined faces across the internet, strangers hearing her truth without context, only emotion. Maybe some of them understood. Maybe some needed to. She replied, "It's over." Lena wrote back, "No, Clara, it's begun." Clara stared at those words for a long time. Somewhere behind her, a door opened. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The sound of his footsteps was enough. Familiar, deliberate, echoing memory itself. Clara. She didn't move. "Shouldn't you be inside with your wife?" He stopped a few feet behind her. "She's busy greeting guests. And you're hiding." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe." The rain hit the edge of the awning in rhythmic drops, a soft percussion against the silence between them. "Why did you sing that song?" he asked finally, his tone brittle. She turned, meeting his eyes, grey and restless. "Because it was the only one that told the truth." He swallowed hard. "You humiliated me." "No," she said gently. "I revealed you and to yourself. There's a difference." His jaw tensed. "You think you're better than me now?" Clara shook her head. "No, Ethan, I just stopped being less." He stared at her, truly stared, for the first time in years. The rainlight reflected in her eyes, and for a moment she looked exactly as she had when they'd first met. Calm, grounded, kind. But there was something else now, a quiet strength he could no longer touch. "I didn't plan for it to go this way," he muttered. I thought I'd feel better seeing you, that maybe I could prove I'd moved on. And," his voice cracked slightly, "I don't feel better." Clara exhaled softly, sadness flickering in her gaze. "That's what guilt does. It waits. You can bury it under money, success, new love, but it waits." He ran a hand through his hair, the facade crumbling. "I wanted to build something big enough to make the past irrelevant. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard your voice." Clara tilted her head. "Then why call me back into your life?" "Why this wedding?" "I told myself it was closure," he whispered. "But maybe it was punishment. For you or me?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, the kind that carries both regret and recognition. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "You can still be better, Ethan, not for me, For yourself, he laughed bitterly. You really think that? I know it, she said, because once I loved the man who could have been. Then she stepped past him, heading toward the parking lot. Her footsteps were quiet, her presence lighter than it had ever been. He turned, watching her go, and for the first time, the image of her walking away didn't fill him with anger or loss. It filled him with something worse, clarity. Inside the ballroom, the music had resumed. Guests were laughing, glasses clinking, the illusion of joy restored. But Ethan stood at the threshold, unable to rejoin the scene. Clara's song still lingered in the air, invisible yet everywhere, woven into the walls, echoing off the chandeliers. And as he watched her silhouette fade into the rain, he realized that forgiveness wasn't something she'd given him. It was something she'd taken for herself, and that was what destroyed him. The days after the wedding unfolded like a slow collapse for Ethan Hale. The headlines were polite, glossy. Tech CEO marries heiress in a stunning ceremony. But buried beneath the glamour was a different conversation, one that refused to die. The performance, the song. Clara Morgan's name trended on social media the next morning. Guests had posted snippets of her singing, clips that traveled faster than gossip could run. People didn't know the story behind the lyrics, but they didn't have to. They could feel it. The sincerity, the ache, the grace. Comments poured in. You can hear truth in her voice. This isn't just a song, it's a confession. Who was she singing to? And somewhere in those digital echoes, Ethan saw his reflection, not as a man admired, but as a ghost haunting his own success. He scrolled through the clips late into the night, the light from his phone washing his face pale. The applause, the melody, her final line, "It's letting go without the pain," replayed like a punishment. In the mirror above the bed, he caught a glimpse of himself, still in his designer shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, wedding ring glinting dully under the light. He couldn't recognize the man staring back. Isabella noticed the change within days. He became quieter, distracted, unreachable. When she asked what was wrong, he smiled that empty smile again, the one that never reached his eyes. Work, he would say. Just work. But even at the office, work betrayed him. His focus faltered. His decisions grew sloppy. He missed meetings, forgot names. His assistant once found him staring out the window at the city skyline, completely still. "Sir, are you all right?" He'd blink and force a smile. Fine, just tired." But inside he wasn't tired. He was haunted. Every deal he signed, every handshake, every toast felt meaningless now. All echoes, no substance. Clara's song had stripped the illusion clean. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small. Meanwhile, Clara's world had begun to change, quietly, beautifully. A week after the wedding, she received an email from a music blogger who'd stumbled upon the viral video. He wanted to feature her story, her resilience, her performance, her voice. Within days, more requests followed. Interviews, recording offers, small concert invitations. She turned most of them down at first. Fame wasn't what she wanted, but she accepted one, a charity event for single mothers. It felt right. The night before the performance, she stood in her tiny kitchen, now warm with lamplight and the faint scent of chamomile tea. Her belly had grown rounder, her movement slower, but her spirit lighter. Lena sat across from her, scrolling through her phone. "You've got thousands of followers now," she said, smiling. "Everyone's talking about your song." Clara laughed softly. "I didn't mean to start anything. That's what makes it special," Lena said. "You didn't sing to be heard. You sang to be free. That's why people feel it." Clara smiled, her hand resting gently over her stomach. "Maybe that's enough." Across town, Ethan sat in his office, lights dimmed, whiskey untouched beside him. The rain had returned that evening, tapping against the tall glass windows. He should have been home. His wife had called twice, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. On his desk lay a letter. Not printed, not typed, handwritten. He had received it that morning. No return address. He'd known the handwriting instantly. Clara's. He hadn't opened it all day. Now with trembling fingers he unfolded the paper. "Ethan, I don't hate you. I used to think I did. That anger was the only way to live with what you'd done. But I learned something. Hate binds just as tightly as love. And I can't carry either anymore. I'm letting go, not to erase what happened, but to make peace with it. You once told me ambition was worth any cost. I hope someday you understand what real worth feels like. Be kind to her. Be honest with yourself. That's all I ever wanted for you. And Clara, he sat there for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. Then he pressed the letter against his chest and bowed his head. No tears came at first, just silence. The kind of silence that humbles. And then, finally, the sound broke from him. Small, ragged, human. The sound of a man who had spent years hiding behind success, finally hearing the truth that love had whispered long ago. The following morning, Ethan called his assistant. "I'll be taking some time off," he said. His voice was steady, not rehearsed. "Of course, sir." "For how long?" "I'm not sure yet." He left the office that day without looking back. No briefcase, no schedule, no entourage. Just the letter in his jacket pocket. Outside, the world smelled of rain and new beginnings. Weeks later, Clara stood backstage at the charity concert, her hand lightly tracing the curve of her belly. The audience buzzed softly beyond the curtain. Families, mothers, children. When her name was announced, she stepped forward into the light. The applause that met her wasn't from wealth or power. It was from people who understood pain and healing. She lifted the microphone, smiled, and began to sing. The song was new, softer, brighter. It spoke of forgiveness, of second chances, of how love, when freed from pride, becomes something holy. And somewhere, among the crowd, unseen in the back row, a man listened. Ethan didn't approach her. He didn't interrupt or seek redemption. He simply listened, really listened, for the first time in his life. And when she finished, he stood quietly, hands in his pockets, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked into the night, the sound of her voice still echoing in his heart. As the final chords faded, Clara bowed her head, whispering to her unborn child, "That's your father's song, not the one he wanted, but the one he gave me without knowing." And in that moment, she understood what her journey had meant. It wasn't about revenge. It was about release. True victory isn't when they regret losing you. It's when you find peace without their apology. The days after the wedding unfolded like a slow collapse for Ethan Hale. The headlines were polite, glossy. Tech CEO marries heiress in a stunning ceremony. But buried beneath the glamour was a different conversation, one that refused to die: the performance, the song. Clara Morgan's name trended on social media the next morning. Guests had posted snippets of her singing, clips that traveled faster than gossip could run. People didn't know the story behind the lyrics, but they didn't have to. They could feel it. The sincerity, the ache, the grace. Comments poured in. "You can hear truth in her voice. This isn't just a song, it's a confession." Who was she singing to? And somewhere in those digital echoes, Ethan saw his reflection, not as a man admired, but as a ghost haunting his own success. He scrolled through the clips late into the night, the light from his phone washing his face pale. The applause, the melody, her final line, "It's letting go without the pain," replayed like a punishment. In the mirror above the bed, he caught a glimpse of himself, still in his designer shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, wedding ring glinting dully under the light. He couldn't recognize the man staring back. Isabella noticed the change within days. He became quieter, distracted, unreachable. When she asked what was wrong, he smiled that empty smile again, the one that never reached his eyes. "Work," he would say. "Just work." But even at the office, work betrayed him. His focus faltered. His decisions grew sloppy. He missed meetings, forgot names. His assistant once found him staring out the window at the city skyline, completely still. "Sir, are you all right?" He'd blink and force a smile. "Fine, just tired." But inside, he wasn't tired. He was haunted. Every deal he signed, every handshake, every toast felt meaningless now. All echoes, no substance. Clara's song had stripped the illusion clean. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small. Meanwhile, Clara's world had begun to change, quietly, beautifully. A week after the wedding, she received an email from a music blogger who'd stumbled upon the viral video. He wanted to feature her story, her resilience, her performance, her voice. Within days, more requests followed, interviews, recording offers, small concert invitations. She turned most of them down at first. Fame wasn't what she wanted, but she accepted one, a charity event for single mothers. It felt right. The night before the performance, she stood in her tiny kitchen, now warm with lamplight and the faint scent of chamomile tea. Her belly had grown rounder, her movements slower, but her spirit lighter. Lana sat across from her, scrolling through her phone. "You've got thousands of followers now," she said, smiling. "Everyone's talking about your song." Clara laughed softly. "I didn't mean to start anything. That's what makes it special," Lena said. "You didn't sing to be heard, you sang to be free. That's why people feel it." Clara smiled, her hand resting gently over her stomach. "Maybe that's enough." Across town, Ethan sat in his office, lights dimmed, whiskey untouched beside him. The rain had returned that evening, tapping against the tall glass windows. He should have been home. His wife had called twice, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. On his desk lay a letter. Not printed, not typed, handwritten. He had received it that morning. No return address. He'd known the handwriting instantly. Clara's. He hadn't opened it all day. Now, with trembling fingers, he unfolded the paper. "Ethan, I don't hate you. I used to think I did. That anger was the only way to live with what you'd done. But I learned something. Hate binds just as tightly as love. And I can't carry either anymore. I'm letting go, not to erase what happened, but to make peace with it. You once told me ambition was worth any cost. I hope someday you understand what real worth feels like. Be kind to her. Be honest with yourself. That's all I ever wanted for you." "Clara." He sat there for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. Then he pressed the letter against his chest and bowed his head. No tears came at first, just silence. The kind of silence that humbles. And then, finally, the sound broke from him, small, ragged, human. The sound of a man who had spent years hiding behind success, finally hearing the truth that love had whispered long ago. The following morning, Ethan called his assistant. "I'll be taking some time off," he said. His voice was steady, not rehearsed. "Of course, sir." "For how long?" "I'm not sure yet." He left the office that day without looking back. No briefcase, no schedule, no entourage. Just the letter in his jacket pocket. Outside, the world smelled of rain and new beginnings. Weeks later, Clara stood backstage at the charity concert, her hand lightly tracing the curve of her belly. The audience buzzed softly beyond the curtain. Families, mothers, children. When her name was announced, she stepped forward into the light. The applause that met her wasn't from wealth or power. It was from people who understood pain and healing. She lifted the microphone, smiled, and began to sing. The song was new, softer, brighter. It spoke of forgiveness, of second chances, of how love, when freed from pride, becomes something holy. And somewhere, among the crowd, unseen in the back row, a man listened. Ethan didn't approach her. He didn't interrupt or seek redemption. He simply listened, really listened, for the first time in his life. And when she finished, he stood quietly, hands in his pockets, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked into the night, the sound of her voice still echoing in his heart. As the final chords faded, Clara bowed her head, whispering to her unborn child, "That's your father's song. Not the one he wanted, but the one he gave me without knowing." And in that moment, she understood what her journey had meant. It wasn't about revenge. It was about release. True victory isn't when they regret losing you. It's when you find peace without their apology. The following months unfolded not as an ending, but as an awakening. The story that had begun in pain and humiliation slowly transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. A quiet testament to how forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply removes its power. Clara's life, once confined to a small apartment and whispered prayers, began to bloom. Her song, recorded by someone at the wedding, had found its way into thousands of hearts across the internet. She received letters from women, from artists, from strangers who had lived through heartbreak and found courage in her voice. "You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. Your song made me forgive someone I thought I never could. I'm keeping your lyrics by my bedside." At first, Clara didn't know what to do with the attention. She hadn't sung to be heard. She had sung to heal. But as she read each message, something inside her shifted. Maybe, she thought, healing wasn't meant to be private. Maybe her story, raw, imperfect, human, could light the way for others still lost in the dark. She began writing again, not to escape the past, but to give it meaning. Her melodies grew warmer, her lyrics softer. Each song carried pieces of her journey, the fear, the strength, the peace. By the time her baby was born, a healthy, bright-eyed girl she named Hope, Clara had already filled an entire notebook with songs. Each lullaby she sang to her daughter became a promise. You will never learn love through pain. Meanwhile, Ethan's world had grown quieter. The empire he'd built still stood, but it no longer filled him. The applause that once thrilled him now felt empty. Every meeting, every deal, every smile, all echoes of a man he didn't want to be anymore. He began spending his evenings walking instead of networking. The city he once viewed from penthouse windows now looked different from the ground, raw, imperfect, real. He found himself noticing things he'd never seen before. The sound of street musicians under neon lights, the smell of rain on asphalt, the way strangers laughed without needing an audience. It was in one of those walks that he passed a small park one evening and froze. A group of people had gathered near the fountain. At the center stood a young woman with a guitar, singing softly into the twilight. Her voice carried through the air, tender, unpolished, honest. He stopped to listen, heart tightening. For a moment, it felt like déjà vu. The song wasn't Clara's, but it carried the same truth, that pain, when sung with grace, could become beauty. He stayed until the end, dropped a few bills into the guitar case, and walked home under the streetlights with tears he didn't bother to hide. That night, he wrote a letter, not to send, just to write. You were right. Ambition without kindness is just noise. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven, but I'm learning to forgive myself. Thank you for breaking me the way you did, gently, completely, honestly. Ethan. A year passed. Clara's small concert series had grown into a charity foundation supporting young single mothers pursuing the arts. Her story, once a wound, had become a bridge, connecting those who'd lost faith in love to those who'd found it again through resilience. On the foundation's first anniversary, she organized a small event, intimate, candlelit, held in a community hall filled with laughter and warmth. Hope, now walking clumsily between her friends' children, was the evening's true star, wearing a tiny blue dress that matched her mother's. As the night drew to a close, Clara took the stage one last time. She looked at the audience, faces glowing in candlelight, hearts listening, and said softly, "This song isn't about pain or loss anymore. It's about what comes after. It's about peace." Then she sang. The melody rose gently, like dawn breaking. Love is not the chain we carry, it's the sky we learn to see. Some hearts shatter just to open, so others learn what free can be. The audience sat in silence, not from sadness but from reverence. It was as if everyone there could feel the circle closing, the story coming full. When the final note faded, Clara opened her eyes and froze for just a moment. At the back of the hall, half hidden in shadow, stood Ethan. He wasn't dressed in a suit this time. No mask of pride, no arrogance. Just a man. Still, quiet, changed. Their eyes met and she saw it instantly. Remorse, gratitude, peace. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once. A silent thank you, a silent goodbye. And that was enough. Because forgiveness, she had learned, doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's just two souls recognizing that they've both survived the storm and found the shore. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Clara stepped outside. The sky above was clear, the moon reflected in the rippling water of the nearby lake. She held Hope close, the child's small fingers tangled in her hair. "You know," she whispered, "you were born from something broken, but that's what made you whole." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying her voice across the water, and as she turned to leave, the last verse of her song echoed faintly behind her. A promise, a truth, a prayer. Some laughter hides guilt, some silence hides grace. But love, real love, leaves light in its place. The cruelest endings often bloom into the gentlest beginnings, because even from pain, grace can grow.